In America today, we stand on the threshold of two possible futures. This election will determine if we are going to be a modern secular state or if we will become a religious tyranny. There's no way out. This election determines if the non-believer remains an equal participant in the American political structure or if we become second-class citizens. And so, I have to begin with some qualifications. I will be slamming one particular political party because it is the vehicle by which church-state separation will be destroyed if they take power. But you must remember that the presentation attacking one candidate or one political party over others is not a generalized attack on conservatism, because non-believers can agree and disagree on a host of issues. In fact, I would say that if one is a true conservative, one would favor church-state separation, and that considering that the Republican Party has always been the party of limited government, it is actually a contradiction for the religious right to be housed within that political party. But make no mistake, so we have to have ground rules because this election requires discipline and money. We have to have the discipline to understand that our focus is narrow and restricted. There's not one thing that I'm going to say today that'll touch upon issues like tax rates, military policy, the death penalty, immigration policy, or anything other than preserving the modern secular state. Our only purpose in this election cycle is to make sure that the Supreme Court does not fall to the religious right. And so if you can bear that in mind and join me in the discipline of, for purposes of this presentation, wearing blinders and pushing every other political issue out of the way except for church-state separation, we can come together on this kind of narrow and specific focus. You have a handout before you which gives you a remarkable history on the true meaning of church-state separation. And contrary to the twisted revisionism of the religious right, you can see clearly that from a sparse and incomplete historical record, there yet emerges an unbelievable, traceable historical reality that the framers intended government to be neutral in matters of religion and intended explicitly for the non-believer to be equal. You can even see that Article 6, Clause 3 of the original Constitution prohibits any religious test for office. Also, since James Madison was the principal architect of the First Amendment, you can see without question that he was devoted to keeping government neutrality between believer and non-believer the primary focus of American government, not allowing, as today's religious right would say, for government to favor belief collectively over non-belief. Look at what he wrote just 4 years before drafting the First Amendment. What has been the legal establishment of Christianity, 15 centuries on trial? What have been its fruits? More or less in all places, pride and indolence in the clergy, ignorance and servility in the laity, in both superstition, bigotry, and persecution. This is not, as the religious right would have you believe, the architect of a Christian nation. In 1786, Madison, working with Jefferson, just 3 years before Madison drafted the first draft of the First Amendment, introduced into the Virginia legislature the Jeffersonian Bill for Religious Liberty, which protected the rights of everybody. And in 1821, so many years later, Thomas Jefferson, speaking of the bill that he and Madison introduced into the Virginia legislature, exulted that the bill defended the infidel of every denomination. How can you favor protecting the infidel of every denomination and then draft a First Amendment that was designed to exclude atheists from equal protection? It's also very important to understand that no one influenced Madison more than Thomas Jefferson on questions of religion and government. And we look at the writings of Jefferson. When he wrote, "It does me no injury for my neighbor to say, there are 20 gods or no God. It neither picks my pocket nor breaks my leg." And then you look at the fact that a few months before drafting the First Amendment and introducing it into the first Congress, Madison wrote to Jefferson with his fear that a majority would deny infidels the right to hold office if the majority could do so. So what does this tell you? This tells you that James Madison, in the summer of 1789, began this very, very delicate process with the intention of crafting religion clauses in which we non-believers would be equal. Now, as sparse as the debate was in that summer of 1789, we see a representative of the kind of defense of conscience for everyone that dominated the thinking of that very enlightened First Congress. Congressman Daniel Carroll, an original signer of the Constitution, said during the debates, and remember, the records are very sparse, so what we have is remarkable. It is what we evolutionists say when the creationists say, look how few fossils there are. We say, but to the contrary, because fossilization is so difficult, the ones we have are remarkable. Well, because the records were so sparse, the ones we do have are even more remarkable because they show an unmistakable trend on the part of the founders to protect the equal rights of conscience of the non-believer. Congressman Carroll said, "The rights of conscience are in their nature of peculiar delicacy and will little bear the gentlest touch of governmental hand." Now, there are 4 justices on the Supreme Court today who would render us second-class citizens. And there's no question about that. They take the view that government can favor all religions against non-believers, just can't favor one monotheistic religion over others. But if they were correct, they cannot explain away the events of September 3rd, 1789, when the Senate, in contemplating the First Amendment, rejected 2 wordings that would have done only that. One was no law establishing one religious sect or society in preference to any other, and the other was no law establishing any particular denomination or religion in preference to any other. If that was the final wording of the Establishment Clause, we would be in very bad shape. But yet, those wordings were rejected, and under Madison's leadership, the Joint House and Senate Committee came up with the broad language of no law respecting an establishment of religion. You can't even show respect to an establishment of religion. And later on, Madison even opposed tax exemptions for property already owned by religious institutions. And Jefferson refused to issue Thanksgiving proclamations. But now that you have before you the most remarkable history, that does not prevent us from being on the precipice of suffering tyranny if we lose the Supreme Court. Had John McCain won, in 2008, we would no longer have church-state separation because there were 2 vacancies on the court. And those vacancies, though they are awash for our side, had they been filled by the other side, we would now have a huge majority against church-state separation. Right now, one of the stalwart supporters of government neutrality in matters of religion and the equality of the non-believer is Justice Ginsburg, who's almost 80 years old and unfortunately suffers from pancreatic cancer. If Mitt Romney replaces her, for the first time in American history, we will have a 5-vote majority to say that the non-believer is a second-class citizen. There's no way out. No other issue matters. For purposes of this election, we non-believers focus exclusively on the United States Supreme Court, and we cannot allow a religious right-wing president to give the religious right the precious only 1 vote more than it needs in order to destroy over 65 years of precedent on church-state separation. This whole business with the religious right arose in the 1980 elections with the rise of the so-called moral majority coalescing around Ronald Reagan's candidacy. Since then, we have seen a revival of religious fundamentalism in American politics that makes us the laughingstock of the rest of the Western industrialized world. We see the symptoms: claiming one true faith and a willingness to impose that on others, intolerance of dissent, a justification through claim that Scripture is holy and without error. In March of 1982, Ronald Reagan, in addressing the Alabama legislature, said, "Sometimes I can't help but feel that the First Amendment is being turned on its head. The First Amendment was not written to protect the people of this country from religious values. It was written to protect religious values from government tyranny." Well, if we are not to be protected from religious values, to what extent can government legislate away our freedoms? If, as President Reagan said, we are not to be protected from religious values, where does it end? Can we be forced to pray? Can the non-believer be silenced? Of course, obviously he didn't think that through, but what are the implications of what he said? And then, in his re-election year in 1984, in August, he said in Dallas, Texas, "America needs God more than God needs America. If we ever forget that we are one nation under God, then we will be a nation gone under." He just morally and politically disenfranchised all of us in this room. It's a good thing that he wasn't able to totally remake the Supreme Court so they would give legal sanction to what he tried to do. In 2004, the Texas Republican Party reaffirmed the United States as a Christian nation, notwithstanding the history I just read you, and called church-state separation a myth, and said that our nation needed abstinence instead of sex education. While meeting with the Pope in June of 2004, President Bush asked the Vatican to push American bishops to be more aggressive in religious issues like banning abortion and banning same-sex marriage. On July 16th of 2004 in Pennsylvania, President Bush told an Amish crowd, "I trust that God speaks through me. Without that, I couldn't do my job." Well, that's pretty scary. That's very, very scary. Because what it means is the President of the United States insists that he is a conduit, a channel for a supernatural being. And it is self-evident that the being he believes in disfavors people like us. Every facet of human life will be affected if we lose church-state separation. Decisions over birth, life, death, sex, health, marriage, education, even free speech, and the role of the family would all come under the dark shadow of religious tyranny. It wouldn't just be a loss of abortion rights for women. As we saw by the Santorum candidacy, there would also be a loss of the right of contraception, because Mitt Romney believes that Griswold versus Connecticut of 1965 was wrongly decided. It was the Griswold case that said that the right of privacy protected the right of heterosexuals married to each other to use birth control. So with the overturning of that decision, we not only lose abortion rights, we even lose the right of adult marital contraception. Bush's first Attorney General, John Ashcroft, when he was still in the Senate, sponsored an amendment to the Constitution that would have deemed life as beginning at the moment of fertilization, which would not only ban abortion, but many birth control pills and the IUD. The founding father of the religious right, who's thankfully no longer with us, Jerry Falwell, wrote in his book, America Can Be Saved, "I hope I live to see the day when, as in the early days of our country, we won't have any public schools. The churches will have taken them over and Christians will be running them." Not only will we have creationism in the public schools, which will dumb down the entirety of the science curriculum and allow other nations to get ahead of us in world competition. In terms of the emerging biotechnologies, we have already fallen behind such countries as South Korea because of the May 2001 ban on stem cell research issued by President Bush. The notion that something called the soul enters a fertilized egg is exclusively a religious concept. Now, in addition to the rights of women, there is a religious right-wing war on the gay and lesbian community. This is unquestioned. In 2003, the United States Supreme Court in Lawrence versus Texas said, no state could any longer criminalize private same-sex acts among adults. Scalia, Justice Scalia, in dissent, said that homosexuality was among the moral evils that people of a state can punish. He needs one more vote right now for that to be the law of the land again, in addition to the loss of church-state separation. Pat Robertson, who was the legal advisor to the president on 3 administrations on judicial appointments, Bush, and Reagan, said a number of years ago on his 700 Club, many involved with Hitler were Satanists, many were homosexual. The two things seem to go together. I don't want him ever again whispering in the ear of a president of the United States when there's a vacancy on the Supreme Court. Unfortunately, the state of Alabama is about to re-elect Roy Moore to the Chief Justiceship. When he was first Chief Justice, he said in a concurring opinion denying custody to a lesbian mother, homosexuality is against both natural and revealed law, a detestable sin. What right does a Chief Justice of a state have talking about sin and revealed law? He went on, the state carries the power of the sword, that is the power to prohibit conduct with physical penalties such as confinement and even execution. To what extent are we regressing if the Chief Justice of any of our state Supreme Courts, even that of Alabama, can speak of execution in the same paragraph as he condemns homosexuality? Now we come to the area of sex education. What have we suffered these past 30 years or so? Right now, federal money in sex ed programs bans the discussion of artificial contraception. All this faith-based money under Bush went to abstinence-only programs. The Washington Post reported at the end of 2004 that many young people in federally funded abstinence-only programs were taught that abortion leads to sterility and that half the gay male teens in America are HIV positive. We would also lose the right of end-of-life choices, regardless of how much we were suffering. In pushing the faith-based initiative, President Bush said in 2003, "People need to know a higher power that is bigger than their problems." What the faith-based program says time after time is that miracles are possible. You see, the American people, except for people like us, are so anesthetized as to the blurring of the lines between religion and government that they weren't even outraged that the president is talking about using taxpayer funds to fund miracles. There have also been efforts of censorship throughout the country. There were efforts to get the Harry Potter series banned, and the current Pope said, this Pope, Joseph Ratzinger, who in the year 2001 sent out a secret letter to every bishop in the world telling them to conceal child-abusing priests from the police authority of the nations in which they resided and to allow the church to handle it as an internal matter. Joseph Ratzinger, who then headed the Office of the Inquisition, who actually felt that of any child rapists on the planet, only his priests were the ones who should be exempt from criminal prosecution and just be subjected to church internal policy. This same person said that Harry Potter books erode Christianity in the soul of young people. 3, the Kansas School Board removed a teen novel because it dealt with homosexuality, and parents had to sue in federal court to get it back. And now I'm going to give you chapter and verse, if you'll pardon the pun, of why the Supreme Court is the single most important issue of this campaign, and why, because of that, we cannot suffer a change in the occupant of the White House. I'm going to give you quotes from 2 justices, Scalia and Thomas, and to let you know that they need just one more ally, and this becomes the law of the land. It doesn't matter how great our arguments are against the supernatural. It doesn't matter how wonderful secular alternatives to religious dogma are in establishing a humanistic and empirically based morality. If we lose the Supreme Court and we lose our equal rights as citizens just because we don't believe in a supernatural fantasy creature, our movement will be set back hundreds of years. So therefore, even though it's hard to swallow, the technical reality of the freedom of the non-believer in America today hinges on one vote on the United States Supreme Court. Justice Scalia, in dissenting in a Ten Commandments case in 2005 wrote, "And this, brother and sister atheists, I ask you to make in your minds the scariest thing you will have heard at this convention." Justice Scalia, the United States Supreme Court, who needs only one more vote for a majority, wrote, "The principle that government cannot favor religion over irreligion is demonstrably false." Since 1947, the court has had a bare 5-vote majority to always say government cannot favor religion over irreligion. Just imagine if Scalia got the one more vote and government could favor belief over non-belief. That can have no other definition than second-class citizenship for us. Scalia further wrote, It is entirely clear from our nation's historical practices that the Establishment Clause, the one clause of the First Amendment on which I'm basing my whole life and activism, permits the disregard of polytheists and believers in unconcerned deities, just as it permits the disregard of devout atheists. So what he's saying is that if he gets one more vote on the Supreme Court, not only are we second-class citizens, but Buddhists and those with some other vague concept of a deity are also second-class citizens. That is chilling. It is absolutely chilling that he has written extensively on how just because we do not believe in the supernatural, just because we view the universe and the world as natural and not paranormal, that government should be justified in shunting us off into second-class citizenship. But even worse, Justice Thomas wrote that the Establishment Clause was not at all designed to keep the non-believer equal. Justice Thomas takes a critically dangerous, revisionist reinterpretation of the Establishment Clause that should motivate all of us to make sure that he never gets a majority of colleagues on the Supreme Court. He said, and he takes the position, that the purpose of the Establishment Clause, and I know this is technical, but our very futures and our freedoms depend on this, so please bear with me. Clarence Thomas has taken the position that the only purpose of the Establishment Clause is not to protect the non-believer as an equal citizen, but the only purpose of the Establishment Clause is to stop the federal government from interfering in state establishments of religion. Therefore, Justice Thomas, a justice on the United States Supreme Court, takes the view today that each state should be free to have their own official church if they want to. Very few people realize this, but this is what we are facing. Let's look at the crop of presidential candidates. Let's look at Newt Gingrich, who even asked his ailing wife for an open marriage, and yet he speaks about faith as the only salvation from the country. Look at what he said about the necessity for political candidates to have faith, as recent as 7 months ago. Does faith matter? Absolutely, Gingrich said. How can you have judgment if you have no faith? Get this, put this right up there with Scalia's quote. How can I trust you with power if you don't pray? Of course, we don't even have to talk about Santorum because we all know the things that he said. But let's talk about what will happen. What will happen if the presidency changes hands in November? Mitt Romney. I would approve justices like Antonin Scalia and Clarence Thomas. Justices who would adhere to the Constitution. So, this is what has been happening since the 1980 elections. America has been transformed from a modern secular state to a nation that is on the verge of a religious tyranny. There is no exaggeration to say that a shift of one vote on the Supreme Court would mean the second-class citizenship for all of us. The things I've just read you are clearly the events of the past 250 years and the past 30 years. Now, before I appeared today, I asked those kind enough to bring me in to speak to you if these organizations had a 501c3 tax exemption, and I was told they did not, which means that we can be more political. And I also, in order to observe the legality of the restrictions on nonprofits, now shed any organizational representation or my connection with 501c3s so that I can speak freely and politically. It comes down to this. Only the re-election of Barack Obama will preserve the United States Supreme Court. Anybody who disagrees with the president on other issues, I understand that. I implore you, for purposes of secularism, put that aside and vote only this year based on the Supreme Court. A shift of one vote, and we are no longer equal citizens. There's no way out. Last month, I gave the president $40,000 and was permitted to spend 3 precious minutes with him. I can tell you, he gets it on church-state separation. In fact, there's a picture that I will not circulate till after the election because I don't want to cause him any harm in this country, where I said to him, Mr. President, I'm the first atheist in history to now be in the presence of my Savior, and he clasped my hand and roared with laughter. I'm asking each of you to go to Obama for America and give as much as you can, because Romney is going to have well over $1 billion. I'm asking those of you who are economic conservatives or conservative on other issues to believe me when I'm telling you I'm not attacking you on any of those issues. Those issues are irrelevant. I don't begrudge you your views on any other issues. I'm just imploring you to support the president's re-election only because of separation of church and state. In fact, I would tell you that if the Democratic Party stood for exactly what it stands for today, and the Republican Party stood exactly what it stands for today, except that there was one switch, and the Democratic Party was the party of theocracy, and the Republican Party was the party of secular government, I'd be asking you to support the Republican candidate for president. This is not a question of a generalized attack on conservatism. This is a narrow laser beam focus on preserving the separation of church and state so we atheists can remain as equal citizens. No one said it better than former New York Governor Mario Cuomo when he once said, "It is rank hypocrisy for the religious right to rail about getting government off our backs, and then to turn around and try to use government to tell us, the American people, what God to believe in and how to apply the judgment of that God to our bodies and to our bedrooms." And so, I'm going to close now so we can take questions, but I implore each of you, all of my brother and sister atheists, agnostics, non-believers, free thinkers, all of you in this room, for this 2012 election year, whatever else we may agree or disagree on, we cannot lose the Supreme Court and we cannot lose the separation of church and state. For this election year, we must be one people with one voice. This is our moment. This is our time. Thank you.